So in your opinion, what ways is the modern schooling system failing us? And how is this new form of schooling, or maybe it's not new, but this form of schooling that's really gaining popularity that you're discussing here, how is this really going to uh, be a much more positive shift for those that are uh, maybe, I guess, disillusioned by the modern schooling system today?
Yeah, I went to public school as well, and I felt a lot of the same things you did. I took a few pre-AP, AP classes, and that's where I really noticed that something was wrong. Uh, the Specifically the AP classes, but really it's the whole culture of the school. But it's kind of concentrated in those classes. It's all about competition, all about personal advancement you know at the expense of anyone else who gets in your way. I remember some moments where I would ask friends to help, or people in my classes, peers, to help me study, or if we could get together and study. And it was like this aversion to any sort of possibly working together with anyone else, because you might share some secrets that are needed to help you advance on the tests or whatever. And it was just that a lot of this was coming from pressure from parents. Kids were extremely stressed. As parents were, I guess a lot of times they feel like their, parents sometimes want to live on through their children, and have their dreams come out through their children. And so you see this immense pressure on these children um, to study very, very hard for these tests, which really don't actually measure so well what you're really learning. But it's the stress, and then it turns into competition, and it turns into um, this kind of isolation, and uh, it, it it seems to be across the board an environment not allowing for much cooperation, um, and really just pitting students against each other. But if we look at the school model, schools are still stuck in this kind of factory idea that the school model that we have is based on preparing people for factory work, to be obedient workers. And you see that in the bell system, um, how you have bells timing each class precisely. Um, that's directly based off of kind of the factory model. You have the road desks, the lines with the line leaders, all that kind of stuff. Uh, that is just a very outdated way of doing education, but it's also meant to control. It's meant to um, guide students into a certain channel. And we don't have an industrial economy anymore. Of course, the planet does, but in the United States, we've outsourced uh, that elsewhere for the most part. So most kids, you know, most schools are starting to look a little bit more towards the service economy. But even there, um, with about half of jobs, I think, are going to be automated in the next 10 to 20 years. And uh, machines learning to replace, we're teaching machines to replace our jobs. Um, I think the traditional schools also, um, they, they, they push this very entrepreneurship idea, this very getting ahead of others, and constantly looking for the next best thing, even if it means stepping on others. But even then, even those schools will not be preparing students uh, for the world that we're heading towards. And so the democratic school model, I think, well, first off, when you have a school where the students and the teachers democratically decide, or sometimes even with consensus decision making, decide how to run everything in their school. Um, you kind of have to have a strong community, because if you know that another kid, any kid at all, has just as much power as you do in the school body to make, in the school meeting, to make, to shape the school's environment, uh, you depend on each other to kind of get what you want from the school. So I have noticed in my time in democratic schools, there tends to be uh, a more cohesive community, tends to be less bullying. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, but uh, the cliquish behavior, the bullying, um, seems to be greatly lessened. And then when you think about democratic schools and any sort of alternative model of schools, it's often pushed in the media as kind of an out there fringe. And so you have um, these kids, when they face the outside world, a lot of times, um, you know, their education system, or the way that they learn, is kind of ridiculed or not seen as good enough. So they have to kind of band together anyway. Uh, and so I think we have a real cooperative culture in the democratic school model that is restoring that idea of the community. Of I think really strong communities have to have the participation of all those who are affected by a decision in making that decision. And I think when you have no say in what goes on in your community, when uh, your extent of knowing your neighbors is scurrying inside quickly, maybe waving, but just trying to get in as fast as you can from a long day of work, so you don't have to look or say anything to your neighbors. Um, I think that that's the kind of environment where, yeah, like you said, you probably aren't going to care as much what happens to these people. And when you're feeling isolated and you mix in um, this kind of entitlement that comes with, you know, being um, a white male in America, where you're kind of told at a very young age that these certain things are kind of an entitlement that you deserve. And as we see across the board, um, the younger generations are noticing that they're, for the first time, going to have a worse quality of life than their parents. They feel like they missed out on this. And you mix that in with a lack of community and not a real stake in the people around you, and you can see how some of this violence makes, it's not, uh, there's not a message popping up in as many people's brains that, this is something you don't do. You don't go out and harm massive amounts of people like that.